The Late Morning Program with Nam Ras Podcast.
And we're recording.
Okay. All right. Wait, is that in the shot? Is this live now?
It's not live. No.
Okay.
All right. Hare Krishna, everyone. You're listening to the Nam Ras Podcast, the #1 Hare Krishna podcast in the world. I'm here with my co-host, Dina Bandhu, a guest
Krishna.
co-host.
Yeah, grateful to be a guest. Thank you.
Yes. And my guests here, Sandipani Muni. Prabhu, how are you?
See you again.
Good. Thanks for coming on, Prabhu. Appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, Sandy, let's talk a little bit about your upbringing. So I know you know my wife Tulsi from, Bhaktivedanta Manor growing up. How was that? How was it growing up at the manor? Let's start there.
So Bhaktivedanta Manor is perhaps one of the largest Hare Krishna communities in the West. It's probably comparable in size to Alachua, maybe around 2,000 devotees in the London area. So we have a lot of youth. So at our temple, which is also famous for being the temple that George Harrison bought for ISKCON, bought for Srila Prabhupada, we have a Gurukul called Bhaktivedanta Manor Gurukula. So I went to Gurukul with Tulasi and many other youth. And it was a very nice environment. It was a day school, so it's less intense than if it was a boarding Gurukul.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it was much more relaxed environment. Mother Guru was our teacher, Mother Moksha, Mother Renu, Mother Vijay. We had different teachers. So it was a very protected, it was a very caring, very sweet environment that we grew up in. And we have so many Prabhupada disciples, so many senior devotees. But it's a very mixed, culturally.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of Gujaratis, Eastern Europeans, British people, French, different.
And your background is half Gujarati, half Ethiopian.
Yeah.
How did your parents meet?
So my father is from Ethiopia. He's even more mixed. He's also mixed between Ethiopian and English.
Okay.
And then my mother is Gujarati. So my mother kind of grew up in the movement from age 4. And then my dad at age 18, he got a back to Godhead in Ethiopia during the time of a kind of fascist. They were trying to overthrow the fascist kind of Marxist kind of government. Who were killing anyone that was against the government. They were killing them. So his cousin sent him back to Godhead, and he joined, and then he eventually made his way to England because it was the same zone of the Guru at the time. And then they were both in the ashram for some years at the same time, and then they got to know each other like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And your teenage years, did you ever go to public school, or you were all the way till...
So our Gurukul at that time, we didn't have enough students to make it into, I think at age 11, I left because you didn't have that many to do secondary school. Mm-hmm. So most people for secondary school went to public school. Mm-hmm. A lot of us went to a boys' school, like a kind of Christian-ish boys' school, which had good grades, and culturally it was a little bit, similar to devotees.
Conservative?
Yeah, a little bit more conservative. So we went to that school, and that was a big change. There's a big difference, of course.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of was a game changer, or it changed the direction of some of the Gurukulis based on what association they had when they went to public school, who were my age, because we had a big group of people my age that went to public school afterwards. Yeah.
Wow. That's something that interests me, that what you just said. So the trajectory of the different people who went to the same background that you might have, what made you become more serious in... It's so cliched, right? So become serious in Krishna consciousness. Right. It's like a cliche thing to say that, but I guess what interested you more?
Yeah.
At some point, taking a personal ownership of
Exactly.
it. Not only that it's your background or that you grew up in that way, but taking it to the next step on a personal level.
Yeah.
That's well put. Ownership. What made you take that ownership and say, okay, I grew up with this, but I want to be this for myself, not because my parents told me to or because I grew up in it, but for me personally, I wanted to be a Hare Krishna devotee.
So that's a very good question. It's a very important question in kind of any religious sociology, but especially in ISKCON, because we're kind of struggling with that balance with, you know, Prabhupada disciples, and then now we have 2-3 generations more. So I've often contemplated it. And actually, one of the acharyas, I have the quote on my phone, but I think it was Ramanuja Acharya. He says that to have strength in devotional service, determination, there are 2 main factors. One is the Purva Janma Samskara, so the samskaras from a previous life. And the second one is the association of those who are very enthusiastic and to take their association. Not only to physically be there, but taking association also means to associate with affection, or it means to actually take some lessons, take something in your inventory from them, on a kind of guidance level. So I think probably I had a bit of both, because obviously anyone that's born in a spiritual path, according to the Bhagavad Gita, if you don't complete your path of yoga, then you're born Suchinam Shrimatam Gehe. So my father and mother are a big influence. I feel like a lot of parents, a lot of people ask this question, and I feel like it's very hard, especially for those who just joined in that age, when they were 18, 19, they just joined. It's hard for them to have the balancing in parenting, where you want the child to be a devotee, but you also can't force it upon them. You have to inspire them to make that independent choice themselves. And that's where I feel like a lot of the youth who are my age, if they were pushed too hard, without giving a kind of inspirational backing, more like a kind of a model of or template of how you should act rather than what is the internal consciousness, then it kind of pushed some people in other directions later on. So I feel like it's a combination of the influence from the parents. Generally, if you look at ISKCON sociology, those who come from an Indian background, because their parents have been Hindus or Vaishnavas, especially if they're from a Sri Vaishnav or Gujarati kind of Vaishnava background or Madhva background, then the parents maybe for many generations have already been Krishna conscious or Vishnu conscious. So often their children are much more balanced between successful materially and spiritually. Because ultimately devotee should have both. So I feel like when you first join and then suddenly you're like in the ashram and then you're a parent, you don't have that cultural training from birth. So it helps. So I feel like the next generation of Gurukulis afterwards, who do have it, it will improve. That's my kind of feeling.
It's very heartening. Yeah, because it's true that there are a lot of samskars that we carry with us from very early years of life. Even if one kind of enters into a Krishna conscious community early on, you know, as you said, depending on like the parental background, the family background, we may have more favorable or more challenging kind of samskars to reckon with as we get older.
I'm sure you've been thinking about it, as have I, as
much.
parents, right?
Yeah.
As a parent.
Absolutely.
What did your parents do you think now as an adult that you appreciate now that, oh, this kind of really set me up for becoming more attractive, besides just being kind of not pushy? What else was it? If you have ever, pinpointed those things.
I think a big part of it also is the... my mother is very soft and sweet, but a very good devotee. So she was never pushy. Often it's the father who pushes more, I've seen, at least in my personal friend group. I have a lot of experience of people, the father pushes a lot. But my father wasn't pushy, but he was always, in a casual way, preaching to us. But not preachy, but he was sharing the knowledge in a very light but rational way. And so he used to give us books like Stephen Knapp's book, like Vedic Culture's Global Existence, which had a big effect. Or we used to read Prabhupada Nectar together as a family. When we would go to sleep, this is many devotee families, they do this. They read books like Krishna book, Mahabharata, Ramayana. So you hear that as a child. I remember when we lived in Ethiopia, we were living with our grandparents who weren't devotees. We were staying in their house, but every night the three of us would I would go in my sister's bedrooms. I have two sisters. So we'd all sit in the bedroom before going to sleep, and he would read to us Mahabharata, and then we'd go to... So I like that. But I feel like he gave me a very strong philosophical understanding.
Your dad?
Yes. So to have strong philosophical understanding, I think is very key in having a strong shraddha.
Right.
So they gave a very strong kind of upbringing. And then later on, I was already very favorable to becoming taking a so-called more serious practice or whatever, however we want to word it. But on top of that, then we had a lot of very powerful association in the UK and also online that also made a big impact later on. That was after age 16.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever feel alienated from the people you grew up with because you might later in life, like you're saying, after 16, you went kind of in separate directions?
That's also a very nice question. So the thing with my parents, which was very good, is they're kind of strict devotees. For instance, me and my siblings and I, we didn't go to have too much of a crazy phase, like taking drugs and like having unlimited partners, or I don't know, trying out going to McDonald's and eating meat or something. So they were kind of strict. It's kind of like how Indian parents are. They're kind of strict with the kind of the yamas and the niyamas, the negative karma, but they were not strict with you have to do bhakti. But
interesting.
But when you're
that is interesting.
when you're not too strict with the negative karma, even if they're into bhakti, they can develop bad habits which pull them away from bhakti. I had friends who were more devotional when they were my age, but because they got into different bad distraction habits, weapons of mass distraction, they kind of lost it, you know, because they started, I don't want to, they probably, everyone has their path, but I noticed that it's also important what you do, because even the Gita explains that bhakti really starts when you're free from this karmic platform. So, but bhakti ultimately has to be, devotion has to be in something of inherent choice which you're making independently out of your free will, that I want to surrender to Krishna. So my parents were very good in that way, so they were always strict, like don't be fanatic, don't be shooting star, because they've seen that, you know, when you grow up in the 80s in ISKCON, and you have the zonal system, so many things, then they learn the lessons. So they were always emphasizing that don't be fanatic, even if you want to be strict. Sometimes I was so strict, even I was a little bit pushing my parents, like, so they felt that was a bit uncomfortable because it's the wrong etiquette. So they used to correct me and then I would listen because I had a good relationship with them. So I was very strict, but I was very careful not to push that on others. So I still have a good relationship with all of them. Even we go on bus tours with so many youth, but you have to learn that point where even if you're strict with yourself, that never push it on others, but to inspire it in others by association. So that way, I maybe have had a certain phase of 1 or 2 years where I was a bit more extreme. Like I remember I had like more of a strict brahmachari phase, and I stopped speaking to all the Gurukuli friends who were girls at the temple and ignoring them and not greeting them. For a couple of years I was like that.
You felt like you had to kind of block
but they
yourself
understood.
out.
They understood. And then later on I came a little bit more in between, like I'm still friendly, but like a balanced way. So probably there was some of it, but a lot of it was reduced, or a lot of it was prevented by my parents' guidance. To not be fanatic, don't be pushy, don't exert, you know, you're on a certain stage. And they would also very much make the point that everyone has a strict phase, everyone has a certain fanatic phase, or brahmachari phase, where you ate those cookies, you're in Maya, you know. But even if you're strict, then you don't eat cookies. You have to appreciate, you know, the sociology within the Hare Krishna movement, that everyone goes through different stages at different ages and different ashrams. So you're saying something, but that's because you're in a certain stage. But in 10 years, what will you be saying? And what will you be doing? Because the same people you're saying that to, when they were your age and doing the brahmacharya ashram you were doing, they were also saying the same thing to others. So it's linked to Krishna teaching in the Gita of time, right? So why is time such an important theme? Because you're also appreciating past, present and future, and you're seeing the person in all three. That way you don't judge that you're at a certain stage now, because when 10 years ago I was at a certain stage. In 10 years from now I'll be at a certain stage. So maturity also means to see things in that context. What's my past, what's my future, what's your past, what's your future, and not trying to force your future onto you now. Because everyone's going in a positive direction spiritually, but you shouldn't force them. So that's the kind of things I picked up.
Long-term vision. You know, again, it goes back to like the path actually being sustainable. Otherwise there's this shooting star phenomenon. So that's
so the balance thing is so interesting, and that everyone has a phase of fanaticism. But then you see also some people don't come out of that phase, right? Staying in that phase forever. 40, 50 years, you're still in that phase. Yeah, you know, I'm asking you these questions because it interests me about how to be a father who will have a child who is not, you know, who wants to not be a devotee, who wants to stay a devotee and be connected with Krishna consciousness. And that's something that, like you said, it's essentially, you said it's nurture and nature at the same time.
Yes. Yeah.
It's both.
It seems to be like setting a certain environment, you know, establishing an environment where the child actually feels able to explore, you know, not completely rigidly reined in at every moment.
Yes.
But also, again, like you were saying with your parents, like they set a really nice example for you too. They were actually really living a Krishna conscious life, and yeah, but keeping it individualized, keeping it natural.
In Mayapur Gurukul, there are different lecturers. So one of them, he used to say, talking about child psychology, that it's very important to understand as parents that the child does not follow the form of the parent, the form of what they do. The child picks up the mood of the parent. So for instance, some children who are very enthusiastic in Krishna consciousness, it seems like their parents are not, they don't come to the temple much, they're not in the public eye so much, but at home they have a very deep devotional practice. So, but the child, when they come to the temple, they become very actuated in bhakti because they're picking up the mood, the devotional mood of the parent, even though the physical, the action template may be different. So, or you may have parents who come to the temple, but their motivation may not be pure. Maybe they have some financial benefit in their role at the temple, or maybe they have position and they're more interested in that mood of getting, you know, recognition, respect. So the child will pick up the mood. The child sees the mood of the parent, not necessarily the actions. So sometimes people wonder that I'm trying to force an action template on the child, but actually if your mood is very much in line, very devotional, then even externally, it's just, for instance, the way you dress.
Yeah.
I was just in Radha Govinda temple, so they have a lot of nice programs for young people there. And I was observing that Ananta and Achyuta, they have wonderful children, right? So their mood is very much kirtan, even though sometimes they come dressed in like Western dress and they like to joke, have fun. But because their mood about kirtan is very serious, the kids have picked up the mood.
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
So sometimes the kids, the external, the way they apply that mood may be different, but they very much observe that mood in the parents. And you cannot hide it from the child. So that's one major lesson I learned from the
mood of
what they used to teach.
Yeah. I was going to say that for me, what made me give ownership to my spiritual life was reading the books and convincing myself theologically, philosophically, that this is important in my life and I need to give energy towards this ultimate path that, you know, of Krishna consciousness. Did you have that moment, or was it that you've always just been attracted to this, and since it's from your childhood and stuff?
That's a very important point, because my parents, they gave us a good template to choose to be Krishna conscious, but you still have to make the active decision.
Right.
So around age 16, I started listening to lectures. So I was interested first. When I was younger, I started getting more into music, like rock music and things like that.
Yep.
Even we had a small band, like in high school.
Nice.
We did a couple of shows. But I was observing.
Dina's a musician.
Huh?
Yeah.
He's a musician.
Yeah. Music and spirituality are always connected. I mean, especially in our tradition, it's so strong.
So I was very much into that, but I was observing in my school friends, they were not so happy. One of my best friends, his parents were some of the top surgeons in London, very wealthy family, but the parents didn't have a good relationship. So I saw how much damage it caused to him being 14, 15, 16, the pain of seeing that. So even though you're so rich, if you don't have a very sweet, loving environment at home where the parents are fighting, it can mean nothing. It can mean zero. So then I learned that lesson, that even being rich doesn't help. And then I had another friend, he was a lead singer in our band. So he was struggling with coming out of his sexual orientation because he was gay, homosexual. But obviously, when you're young, especially school children, they like to really tease each other, bully each other.
Yeah.
So he was feeling some difficulty in expressing that and coming in the public eye. So he was also having a lot of inner turmoil. And then I had another friend who was addicted to drugs, our drummer in the band. So he was smoking weed and like waking up late. So we'd come to practice and then he would still be sleeping. So I was observing everything my parents told me in my practical life. So that was one step that my father gave me, like a very good philosophical foundation. A huge amount is directly came from him. And then after observing all of that, one of my favorite bands, I got to meet them.
Really?
So yeah, I got to meet them. And I won't say the name in case somehow they find this. But so the lead singer, I looked up to them because I was not interested just in music that was nice. It had to also have a good message behind it. Because one of the meanings of art is it's a method of sharing a positive, uplifting, social, political message, but through a kind of artistic vehicle. So I was very much interested in that revolutionary, positive, conscious political messages.
You can say the name. I'll bleep it out.
Huh?
I'll bleep out the name.
The King Blues. The King Blues. They're not that famous.
No, I haven't heard of them.
They're not very famous. They're a ska folk band.
Okay.
Well, have you heard of Enter Shikari?
No.
They're also not that famous. But anyway, I got
What
to meet them.
kind of music? Folk music?
It's like ska, but
Ska,
acoustic ska.
Oh, okay.
Huh.
With very kind of, like punk, hardcore, they have very positive message about veganism. Even I was into straight edge also.
Really?
So anyway, this band, they were very much into positive message about love, about changing the, government, so many positive things. So I was thinking, yeah, this is also very cool. Because when you're young, teenage years, that's the activist kind of, you have a high proclivity towards activism, social causes. If you study even like LGBTQ, all of these things, they generally happen with people between like 15 and 25. That's like the most common.
A very revolutionary age. Yeah.
So I got to meet the band members and I got to become friends with that group. And then I observed that the band members, although they had such a nice message, without going into too much detail, they were very much hypocritical in their social dealings, especially romantic dealings and other things. So then I became fried that also this materialistic music also is not any source of refuge. And then I was listening to Shelter. That was a big positive impact. The Krishna core movement. Raghunath was here. So he very much inspired me. His lyrics are super Krishna conscious. Even though he was signed on the Sony label, he is like magical guy that he could do both. Be mainstream, but also... So then in his album, there was a lecture by somebody who lives near to here called Ravindra Swarup Prabhu.
Yes.
So I started listening to him. And he has a PhD from Temple University, a great university. He's a doctorate in philosophy or something similar.
Doctorate,
Yeah. And then Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj also has a very powerful material education. He went to Princeton. He studied psychology and some other things. I forget everything he studied. So I was listening a lot to him, Ravindra Swarup Prabhu, and then I started listening more to Prabhupada. So they have a very systematic approach to presenting the Gita, the basic philosophy. Because I had heard it from my father and parents. At Gurukul, they taught us some things, but we were so young, we didn't really understand anything. But at age 16, 17, I started really to go deep. And every day I had a 1-hour bus journey. I would listen to a lecture on the way there, on the way back. And every year, my faith was building up, building more and more and more. And I was listening more and more and more. Now I'm kind of a fanatic about listening to lectures. I like reading as well, but even more listening to lectures. So I feel like that's a big impact. So as you were saying, the philosophical, having strong philosophical understanding, I think is a key element, and being convinced that it's a spiritual science, not just any other religion.
Yeah.
So also understanding the link of Sanskrit with world cultures, with world languages, and other things, archaeology, historical factors, sociological positives of the Vedic culture, and also the philosophy together, the content and the context. It creates a strong foundation.
Wow. Yeah, I was just going to say, I could see, especially as someone raised, in a Krishna conscious family, raised in that environment, how this experience of kind of like by your own inspiration, starting to listen to lectures and hear from very powerful devotees, how that could really help things to move from kind of like, this is my family religion, this is my tradition, to kind of, this is really my spiritual path.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very important to have a systematic understanding of Krishna consciousness. Because there's one Gurukuli. So since I became inspired, I also became inspired to try and help youth within the movement. So I do the bus tours with Manoram. Almost every year I try and help do some service with him. And now we do something in Europe called Erasmus, which is a government-funded 1-week student retreat for education. So we can link it with Krishna consciousness, for instance, farming. So we bring them to ISKCON farm, but we also do kirtan and philosophy. Or we take them to an island and we study like about the rocks, whatever it is. So the government fund and they pay for the tickets and accommodation and food for 30, 40 youth. So we do that and we do other things, such as with SB Keshav Maharaj in Sweden. So one of the boys, so I try to contemplate deeply what I learned and try to apply it and present it to other youth. So a couple of years ago, I went to Sweden and there's a very, very sweet group of youth who live on a farm. It's a bit like Alachua, but the difference is they actually live on the farm. And for 1 week during Corona, I did every day like a 2-hour seminar on the philosophy, but more like a school, like academic way with PowerPoints and step by step. Like one day, it was just like Vedic epistemology. Like why is the supreme way to get knowledge not just your senses and by inductive, deductive knowledge, but by Shastra. Just a simple topic, but then it gives them faith in Shastra. Then another point was like Yuga Dharma, so systematically explaining why do we do Harinam Sankirtan now. So simple but systematic lectures. Another one was on kind of linking it, basically showing how Krishna consciousness is not just a religion, but it's a spiritual science, and how the Bhagavad Gita's presentation of knowledge is not as an ethnic, historical or geographical tradition, but actually it's something that you get by a lifestyle requirement, so living in the mode of goodness. So therefore it explains Sattvat Sanjayate Jnana. By being in the mode of goodness, even if you're Greek, if you're Christian, by following certain principles, such as regulative principles, it gives you automatic access and realization to more subtle aspects of knowledge. So I was explaining all of these things, and then many of them after that, not only myself, but Madhava Prabhu helps, Keshav Maharaj also comes. So they had a very good Krishna conscious kind of retreats that year in Corona. And then about, probably all of them really, they had a big change. Like it was a big game changer in their spiritual life. 4 of them are now brahmacharis.
Really?
So, and one of them, he said to me that I grew up thinking it's just a religion, like you go to school, oh, I'm Christian, I'm Hindu, I'm Hare Krishna, whatever. But he said, now I understand that actually philosophy is not monopolized by religion. Philosophy is a methodology of understanding knowledge, especially metaphysical, spiritual knowledge, in a rational, systematic way, and with the ability to categorize, to falsify things, to use logic. So he said that Krishna consciousness gave me that, not just that it's a religion, and that was a big game changer for him. But a lot of youth, they don't understand that point. They think it's just another religion that I was born into. Then it's not that rational that why should I take it seriously just because I'm born into it. But when you understand it's a spiritual science, it's the oldest living, continually practiced religious tradition in the world. It's only one of 2 places which, according to all Western academics, has systematic philosophy, ontology, epistemology, teleology, all of these. And it's the only one from the 2 that has esoteric aspect, like such as rasa and lila. Because the Greeks were also very philosophical and systematic, but there's not really, the theology is not as strong as the Vedic. So when you understand all of these points from a historical, sociological point of view, then even if you don't like ISKCON, maybe you have a fight with the temple president. You will only reject ISKCON, but you'll still keep the Vedas.
You'll reject
still
the institution,
keep
but not the path.
That's a difference that a lot of people don't make. That there's the philosophy and the timeless teachings, and there's the container of that philosophy, which is the society or the institution. But if you, like you said, if you have some problem with institution, they'll throw out the whole thing. But in reality, it's that what are we attracted to mostly is what's inside the container, which is the philosophy, the theology, and things like that. So when you separate those things, I think Kadamba Swami on the podcast made a really good point about that. it's in one of his books, like one of his last books he wrote to his disciples. He was making that difference that don't become discouraged in Krishna consciousness because something's wrong in like the society. That's like the more shallower level. But if you dive deeper, and when you deeper is like the practice of Krishna the actual practice, the actual philosophy, the theology of Krishna consciousness, that's something that will sustain you in your spiritual life and on a long period.
It's like people follow different culty kind of groups, right? I don't want to name names, but because now with the YouTube, you know, transcribing everything, but certain groups, even in India, there are certain gurus who are big, right? So they teach a lot of stuff that's objectively good for you, but when people lose faith in that guru because they see some controversy comes, they throw out everything.
Everything.
For instance, if you follow a guru and he teaches you smoking is not good for you, then you should understand that independent of Krishna consciousness, why it's not good for you, or why it's not good to kill animal. So if you understand everything rationally, then even if you reject one aspect, maybe an institutional, ecclesiastical aspect, all of the other points are still philosophically sound, logical, and they're still rational to follow.
Yeah, totally.
So I can respect maybe someone had a social issue with a certain movement, so they change movements. But if you reject the whole thing, it means you didn't actually understand the purpose of it.
Yes, yeah.
But to get to that point, it seems, and this is something you were talking about with the youth too, it requires an ability to engage in critical thinking. You have to be able to think critically. And it's interesting because a lot of the time it seems that those who engage in critical thinking, they momentarily put themselves at risk of, like, yeah, as you said, potentially, you know, throwing things out entirely or kind of missing the point or becoming, you know, overly critical of, you know, what is good within the tradition. But at the same time, it does seem to me that after engaging in that process of critical thinking, that's where you find people who actually develop very deep, firm faith because they really worked it out. It wasn't something that was just kind of accepted at face value, because you can do that and it's uncontroversial, but it never goes so deep. So yeah, I was just thinking about that, how, you know, you're encouraging in a certain way people to engage with the philosophy in a way that, you know, they can really explore it and examine it, so that when they do ultimately, we hope, right, when they ultimately accept it, it's coming from a place of, you know, real, genuine acceptance and having gone through it meaningfully.
Yeah, totally.
And another important point, because for many years I was listening to lectures, but I wasn't having a active sadhana. So for about 2 or 3 years, I was just addicted to lectures. I wasn't even reading much. It's like mainly I was listening to at that time Bhaktivedanta Maharaj, Ravinda Swarupu and Prabhupada, and watching YouTube videos of them. And then it got to a point where you realize, okay, now I've become convinced enough, I have to practically do something. But I was lazy to do it. Like, for instance, chanting japa. So I was more into bhajans. Like most Gurukulis, they like bhajans. Like Friday night bhajan we have at the manor. So one of my friends, he said to me, it was in 2010, he said to me, this year in Kartik, let's both commit to chanting 4 rounds for that month.
Wow.
So I said, okay, that's a good idea, and it's something that's a logical progression. You know, I have strong faith in this, I'm convinced, but why am I not applying the medicine now? So I did it for the month, and then it was very nice, and I started feeling the effect, subtle effect. And then I decided, okay, I'm going to chant 8 rounds, and then later I came to 16. But still, that was not enough. On top of that, what pushed me even more, because I remember growing up, my father, the preaching mood which I have, a huge chunk of it comes from my father also. He has that mood. So as we mentioned, the child picks up the mood. Because when I was growing up, my father was working in a corporate job, so he didn't actually have time to preach. But he'd always talk about it passionately, and he'd always be very interested to hear news of preaching or give critical thinking related to ways to improve preaching within the UK, within the movement. So in terms of his actions, he was just working, so he didn't have time to preach. His main service was doing pujari once a week and going to morning program sometimes. But he didn't have time to preach. But he had the mood of preaching. So I picked up the mood, but my form is different because I'm in a different ashram than him. And I'm younger, obviously, at that time he was in his 40s. So I was 18, 19 when I started preaching. So I had that access for my lifestyle to adjust to that. So, but a big effect came when one devotee, he saw me, he said, oh, this boy is very sincere He wants to go deeper. He's interested in Harinam. I was listening to Indra Prabhu. So interesting point is, I'm not actually very much into the Vrindavan complex style of kirtan, like Indra Prabhu's style.
Yeah.
I like it, but I'm not that passionate about it.
Yeah.
I'm more into the little bit Western poppy Harinam style of kirtan. So people who know my kirtan, they know. I just know maybe 3 or 4 Indra tunes and maybe 200 Harinam tunes. But I understood that if Indra is a pure devotee, and the way he passed away, pretty much everyone got that conclusion, then it's very important not just to listen to his tunes and then imitate his pronunciation of the mantra, imitate his melodies. That's also nice. Like, I love to listen to some of them. But it's also very important to hear what he has to say and take that very seriously.
Yeah, totally.
Because pure devotee should take whatever they say seriously. And he just passed away in 2010, right? July?
July.
So that was around the time I was having, a shift in practice. Maybe 2007-8 was a shift in philosophical understanding. So he was always emphasizing, go on Harinam, preach Krishna consciousness and share the holy name. Not just, he always would say, I'm sitting here in Vrindavan chanting because there are millions of people coming to this temple. But he said, and this is my service to Prabhupada, to help run this program. But he said, if not, I would be in the West doing Harinam in New York or wherever it is. So he also made a big impact. And then Tribhuvanath Prabhu. I started listening to his lectures because I come from a half African background in this particular incarnation. So I'm always interested in devotees from Africa. So that's why I like Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, because he was preaching in Africa. And I lived in Africa as a child. And I was feeling like I don't know much about ISKCON in Africa. So Tribhuvanath Prabhu, we don't have time to discuss, but I recommend you can watch it on YouTube.
We have time.
Yeah, we have time, sure.
So he was one of the biggest pioneers within the Hare Krishna movement. He's one of the unsung heroes of ISKCON.
Yeah, we don't know him so much in America.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't hear about him until I was like an adult.
Yeah.
Because, the only reason I know is through Tulsi and like her father's connection with him and stuff. But besides that, did you hear about him?
I not initially. No, not initially. I think, sometime later, maybe just like, how we always talk about, we love to research the history of the Hare Krishna
ISKCON history. We're both ISKCON history buffs.
Yeah. So I think somewhere along the way, maybe I think he at some point was connected to the devotees in London, like Radha Krishna Temple, and like sometime, related to that, I must have read about him. And then, what I've read about him, what I've heard about him is so inspiring. But you don't hear his name come up that often.
Yeah, unsung heroes.
At least in the US. Yeah, it's true.
So I don't want to tell too much of his story, but we're making a book of his biography.
Beautiful.
Really?
The research is done, so I'm on the team we're producing his biography. It will be like Radha Damodar Vilas.
Oh, wow.
So, because he was very unique. So he joined when he was age 16. He grew up as an orphan. He went to a Catholic boarding school, but then he was abused. It happens often in boarding schools, unfortunately. So he was very much fried with the material world, very much dissatisfied. And he was looking for something spiritual. So age 16, he met the devotees. And then he joined, by age 17, he met Prabhupada. Then age 18, he was the temple president of the Berry Place Temple.
18?
Yeah. And he was the first temple president of Bhaktivedanta Manor. And he opened a temple in Scotland. So he was one of the most important British Prabhupada disciples.
Wow.
And then he went to India because Prabhupada wanted people to help in India. And then he heard Prabhupada said that if anybody preaches in the Muslim countries, I will personally take the dust from their feet and put it on my head. So he heard that and he said, wow, Prabhupada is very passionate. That would please him. Because he liked anything he heard that would please Prabhupada, he would jump at it. So he heard Prabhupada wanted a temple in Scotland. So he was doing Harinam in the snow, passing out without proper clothes. And he managed to open a big temple there, made a lot of devotees.
Wow.
So he was in India and he heard that. So he decided to start a book distribution team in Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Dubai, like UAE, Egypt. So he was preaching in the Middle East, Turkey. And he printed the Bhagavad Gita in Arabic. So a devotee
was he the first one to do that?
He was the first one to run the team, but it wasn't only him.
Right.
So such as Ravanari Prabhu, who recently passed away, translated it. Bhakti, he was called Avinash Chandra. Now he's called Bhakti Vaibhav Maharaj, was on his team, but he was the leader of the team, Tribhuvanath Prabhu. Mahakratu Padmapani from Canada. So he was the first one to push it, basically. So he empowered this team, And for about 4 or 5 years, they were going to different countries, especially in Syria, where there was a war going on. And they were distributing Gitas, like thick, you know, like the old Prabhupada's Gita, like the Macmillan, I think, the really
Max
thick,
72, yeah.
super heavy one.
Yeah.
Not like a small, subtle one with like a with like a subtle background. It was a normal cover, Krishna and Arjuna cover.
Yeah, yeah.
So he distributed that. They printed 10,000, then they printed another 10,000. And then some safety issues came up in 1981, so he left and went back to Europe. And then later he went to Africa because he saw nothing was happening in Africa. So his whole life was a life of self-sacrifice, dedication, adventures, such as in Africa, many adventures you can imagine, with safety, with debating born-again Christians. So he was very, very logical, and his lectures were so simple. He will explain just a basic point. For instance, whenever we look for things in this world, we like things to be full. Like we want a full bank account, we want to have a full house, we want to have a wardrobe full of clothes. So just simple point like that, he will explain it so much and link it to the psychology of the soul. Or like determination for 2 hours, he'll talk just on that theme, but goes so deep on such a basic point. So it's really good for new people. So because of that, so many people went to his lectures, and by one lecture, they became convinced and became devotees. And so many people, I know many examples personally, so I'm not just saying it in a hyperbolic way.
Sure.
And for instance, in Swansea in 1997, he did a kirtan for 20 minutes, and then Mahavishnu Maharaj gave a lecture. And then after that, 3 people joined on the day, and they became brahmacharis on the day, same day. They're still in Wales right now.
Really?
They're married now, but they're still in Wales. So he had this Shakti. He went to, I think it was Mombasa University in the 95, 96. And then he gave a lecture, and it was so systematic, rational, that one of the PhD students says, I want to surrender to your program. He was called Bhakta Joe. So then he was brahmachari for 5 years under him. So by listening to his lectures, especially him, there were so many influences. Prabhupada, Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj, Tribhunath Prabhu, Aindra Prabhu, so many. But especially he and his team, he passed away, but he had a team which is still running now, and they transformed my practical devotional life. Because at that time, it was just theory that I know preaching is good, the philosophy is very systematic, rational, unconquerable really. And I knew that sadhana was important, waking up, following the principles, chanting japa. But to take the active missionary spirit, which was dormant in me, it came out by association, especially with his team.
He still has like followers in UK who are basically do Harinam everywhere and stuff. I invited Giridhari Prabhu actually to the podcast when I was doing it remotely. But if Prabhu's listening, I'd love to have him come over here.
I can ask him. He can give a longer... Tribhunath Prabhu has so many adventures.
Yeah.
So we don't have time today, but for instance, they were driving fast and their bridge was broken. So he had to skim over a bridge with like 30 devotees inside to get to a program in time. And there was a gap in the bridge. So he had to go fast enough that he would cover it. Many stories. In the Middle East, he was in prison in solitary confinement. And then once he was doing japa with a devotee called Gaurahari, and they're walking around at night and they parked by a jungle. And then later on, people told them, you guys are crazy. There's so many lions and tigers have killed people in that forest where you were chanting. So many crazy stories. So if you listen to Giridhari Prabhu, and when the book comes out, you can learn about those stories.
I see the similarities between the way people become inspired in Krishna consciousness. They contact someone. Someone like you know,
like
different devotees that you've been inspired by.
Yeah, you see someone who's living the teachings. You get to see it translate into real life, the person who has affection for you, and you get to really, connect in that way, and you develop affection for them.
That it's not only like listening to the lectures or reading the books, but it's also primarily also contacting someone, a human being who you were inspired by, who's farther down on the path than you, and who you feel like he's giving you that love and affection. And I think it's so important for devotees because now we can get caught up in online where everything's online. You can hear every lecture, everything online, but that will never be replaced by actually being in the association of devotees, like in person, right? I think that's really important.
I think it's true. Yeah, I mean, just to be honest, I've heard from, devotees who found that, it was very difficult during like the coronavirus pandemic, the height of it, because really, although there were so many lectures and so many, engagements for us online, it felt impersonal, or, you can turn off the video or, whatever, whatever it is.
Prabhu, turn on the video.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I was going to ask you about not just that you took to Krishna conscious, but you took to it and then you wanted to go further. Another further step is with sharing it with other people. And you kind of answer the question of, but I'm still interested to know, why is it that a lot of young devotees or Gurukulis born into it, why does that sometimes not appear? Like, I can speak from my own experience. I don't have like a crazy thirst to share Krishna consciousness. Like, if I see someone is like ripe for it, whoever's in my peripheral vision, then or whoever I meet, I might be like, oh yeah, check out this, this is what we do, blah, blah, blah. But I'm not like going out on Harinam and doing, but that's like not the phase of life I am in also right at the moment. I would love to, but it's, what is it that what was it for you that kind of gave you that, okay, I need to share this because this is so valuable?
So it can be a combination of things.
Yeah.
Such as your psychophysical nature. Some people, like even if you look at astrology, some people are more interested in teaching. They're more interested in revolutionary. Sorry. Maybe,
Water?
Maybe,
wow.
Okay, just
someone
do,
might
the question again, I think, right?
So, yeah, the question is that you described how you took to Krishna consciousness, but then that next step of sharing Krishna consciousness, that some people don't get to that step, or some people may not be inspired to do that. They might just be inspired to practice themselves. But what was it that inspired you to actually, okay, now your focus is maybe, you can talk about Harinam Ruci, you were traveling and preaching and doing Harinam, and now you're in Miami and, preaching at yoga studios and teaching yoga students and things like that. So
yeah, one is just some people have that kind of revolutionary, like even when you look at astrology, certain people have a kind of psychophysical nature in that way.
Yeah.
So another reason also, which I haven't mentioned yet, is my Guru Maharaj, Jayapataka Maharaj. I see Tribhunath actually like at the time like my primary guru, but obviously he had passed away. He was about to take sannyas and become a guru, but he passed away.
Tribhunath Prabhu was. Wow. Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So just a year he got cancer. So, but one of the reasons I picked Jayapataka Maharaj, there are many, many reasons, but one was because of he had a very similar preaching spirit. So he often makes the point that you don't need to be a preacher, but you should have the mood of interest of sharing Krishna consciousness with others. But for instance, if you're married and you have 3 kids, so you don't really have time to like do too many things outside. When you have kids, it's like full-time job.
Yeah.
And if you take away too much time from them to preach, then you also have a negative effect on their upbringing.
Yes.
So it's very important not to do that. You have to be very balanced. For instance, my father, he likes preaching, but he didn't do it too much because he had 3 kids. And now that we've all grown up, now he's preaching full time because he's at the right time in his life.
Wow.
So we have a psychophysical nature. And then another very important aspect is by association. Like you guys are mentioning about associate. So that's what Sankirtan mission means, right? Like Hari Parshada Prabhu makes a nice point that he says that in the Sandarbhas, the definition of Sankirtan is given that Bahu Bir Militva Kirtyati Iti Sankirtan. That when a plural number of people congregate together to glorify the Lord. So that could be doing Harinam, or it could be the Sankirtan in like the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Katha in Naimisharanya is described as Sankirtan because they're glorifying in a congregation.
Yes.
So preaching, there's no really Sanskrit word for preaching. It's just Sankirtan or sharing Krishna consciousness with a larger audience, basically. Sometimes we say prachar, but prachar literally means just to present this practice forward to others. It's not like this Christian-esque like converting, proselytizing thing. So it just means to engage people in service, engage them in chanting and hearing. So association is also very important. And after the festival team, which I was doing, they gave me a huge amount of inspiration. Giridhari Prabhu was Tribhunath's personal servant for 14 years. And then he has another guru, Diksha Guru, Satsvarup Maharaj, but it's a devotee called Parashuram Prabhu.
Yes, Parashuram.
And he takes Tribhunath as his primary guru, even though he has a Diksha Guru also. So a few devotees have that kind of attachment, like with Aindra Prabhu.
Yeah.
So because guru is not something that needs to be legislated. A guru is self-effulgent, and nobody needs to say this is a guru, but by their qualities, automatically people want to serve them because they are a guru. They have a guru nature, like a guiding nature. So a huge amount of that preaching inspiration came from that practical association.
Yeah.
And Hari Parashut Prabhu says, as you're mentioning online or doing things privately with technology, he says that is not Sankirtan, even if you're online. Because Bahubir, it means plural, right? So in Sanskrit you have dual case, like AU, they add AUO at the end. So like, but plural case means at least 3 people. So it means that you have to have at least 3 people physically congregating, because Milidva means to congregate, to mix together. So Bahubir, multiple people, plural people, they have to congregate in real life to get that effect. So I was on that festival team while I was at university and things like that. And then I met a team called Harinam Ruci, because especially from Aindra Prabhu and other people, I really was developing interest in Harinam.
Yeah.
And actually I was chanting after that point where I could chant 4 rounds. It was very hard to go to 16. I couldn't do it actually. But the way I could do it, for 18 months, I couldn't jump higher than 8. I couldn't do it. But at that point, I started regularly committing to Harinam, and that boosted my taste for the holy name so much. And one day, somebody there asked me, he's one of my Harinam inspirations in the UK, Govinda, you know him.
Oh, Govinda Prabhu.
Yeah.
I love him.
So this was, I think, 2011, or I started 16 rounds in 2012, January 2012. So we were on Harinam, and we were coming back from Harinam, and he said to me, how many rounds are you chanting? I said, oh, I'm chanting 8 rounds. So it'd been quite a while.
Yeah.
From Kartik 2010 till January 2012, I couldn't increase more than 8.
Yeah.
And I said, oh, I'm only chanting 8 rounds. So he said, that's not enough. He said, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur says, if you do not chant 64 rounds a day, then you're considered to be on the platform of animal life. And then he said to me, but Prabhupada gave only 16 rounds. So he said, you should do 16. So Govinda, he's very direct, but he didn't say it in like a way that puts people off.
Yeah.
You know him, he's a very matter-of-fact person, Scottish. Yeah.
Scottish devotee. He's really cool. Cool devotee.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Because he says it dispassionately. So he's like, well, Bhaktisiddhanta says you should chant 64. If you don't, you're an animal. But he's not really saying it personally to me.
Yeah, no, he's not like that.
This is what was said.
Yeah.
This is
just as a matter-of-fact thing. So I didn't get hurt by it, but I thought, whoa, that's intense to say that to me. I'm just a young guy, you know?
Yeah.
And then there was one Mataji, who was also our friend. So he said, don't worry, you know, what he means is just try and increase, 2 rounds maybe. So then that day I thought about it, and literally the next day I started chanting 16 rounds, and I never stopped since that day.
Wow.
So sometimes heavy is not bad.
Yeah.
But it has to be with a loving mood and a dispassionate, like non-fanatic way.
Sure.
It's like Prabhupada sometimes said heavy things, but because it was with love, people accepted it.
That's the thing.
They accept him as an authority, so they accepted it.
Yes.
So still, after doing the festival team, it's kind of more congregationally developed program. So I wanted to do something a bit more intense, not just a part-time service of preaching. So after graduating from university, we both are in IT background. I don't work, but we're in IT background.
Yeah.
So traditional Gujarati topic to study. So I wanted to study philosophy actually, but my parents were like, there's not really any, income from doing philosophy unless you're like a famous, author or famous lecturer in a big university.
What did you study? Like computer science?
Technology, yeah.
Oh, information technology.
Less programming.
Less programming, yeah. Oh, cool.
I didn't like the programming side. I mean, it's not bad. For work, it's good, but I found it a bit boring. So I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to do philosophy. I was thinking about Vaishnav theology in Radhadesh. So I thought, okay, maybe, it's not a good job. I'll just do it as a side project, like studying privately at home. So I did IT. And after I graduated, I was like, I want to go more deeper in bhakti. So I was age 21. So I graduated in July, I don't know, when do you graduate university? May, I think. And then by August, I decided to join Harinam Ruci. So they're a team that travel around the world, 6 continents a year, and they have a certain route which they cover every year. And it's a simple program, basic morning program, and then Harinam every day, 7 days a week, nothing else. So 2 things, just morning program, morning sadhana, Harinam.
Nice.
So I was already very into Harinam. Tribhunath Prabhu is also very famous for doing Harinam. He displayed a lot of very deep, the way he chanted, let's just say without getting too rasik, he had a very deep quality of his chanting, which a lot of people have described in his Harinam. So that very much inspired me. And his recordings, they gave me such a powerful boost. I forgot, there's a very important story that I actually had a dream of him, and that also was a pivotal moment in my spiritual life, where there's a recording of his album. You should all check it out. And he's singing Guru Puja in Ishrath Temple in Ireland, and he's extremely fired up. And he doesn't have an amazing voice, but he has this tendency that when he sings in like the highest key and in the highest octave possible. So just on the border where you almost break your voice, you know. That was how he used to sing, like very ecstatic. So I had a dream. I fell asleep listening to his kirtan, and I had a dream that he was leading that particular track in the album, the Guru Puja, in the temple in Nairobi where he used to preach in Kenya.
Yeah.
And I was attending the kirtan feeling so much ecstasy, but I couldn't dance. I was like stuck in my body. And I was like, it was like, that's quite an interesting dream. And after that day, I had my interest peaked very severely in Tribhunath Prabhu. So in one sense, I feel like he came to me in a dream.
Wow. Do they revere him in the same way they do in England, in Africa, in like different
also,
places?
But
like Nairobi?
just
and
certain countries where he went, yeah. So he went to about 6, 7 countries, like basically East Africa. So they do, yes. So then I basically had all this inspiration with Harinam. So I said, okay, I'm going to join Harinam Ruci for a year.
How did you hear about them?
So they used to come through to England. And I like Harinam, but I noticed that devotees are not always conscious about how the public feel. Actually, Hridayananda Maharaj makes this point. I think it's very interesting. That because our Western preaching mission is not doing that well, pretty much since the 80s, if you look statistically, it's doing well in the West, but mainly with people from Indian or Russian background. So we overemphasize the merit of Agyata Sukriti, that we don't even feel the need to preach, like they just need to hear the Harinam. They don't even need to like it. We can even be disturbing them. Like somebody can be busking, we can even spoil their whole crowd that are watching them and walk straight through in front of the crowd and disturb everyone. But they've heard the holy name, so they're getting purified.
Right.
But the thing is, we don't understand it that well philosophically, because just as you have Agyata Sukriti, there are other forms of Sukriti. So the powerful form of Sukriti is Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti, which is when you make a conscious act of service. For instance, if you distribute books and you give a free book, they're not consciously doing an act of service so much. But by giving a donation, and they know it's to Krishna, they know it's to Hare Krishnas, they're doing Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti, which is many, many times more powerful than Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti. And what is the evidence for that? The evidence is given directly in the Gita, where Krishna says what are different types of sacrifice. So a tamasic sacrifice is one where you do something, but you don't actually realize you're doing it. So we force someone to hear, we force them to take prasadam without them knowing it's prasad. For instance, if you give somebody prasadam and they don't know it's prasad, you're actually hankering their ability to advance in bhakti in one sense, because they're only making Agyata Sukriti.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's pretty
So that's why
interesting.
Prabhupada said, when you give prasad, they should know that this is offered to Krishna. So he said to put it in Govinda. So they do that in London. So one of the teachers in Mayapur, he explains that point, that actually, even in prasad distribution, if they don't consciously know this is offered to Krishna, they make less advancement.
Oh, that's very interesting.
That's very interesting.
So we overemphasize Agyata Sukriti, and he says it's a psychological thing, because when you have a losing team, then you blame the other team. So it's not that our preaching is not doing that well. It's because they're all karmis and they're all useless. They're not intelligent enough to understand the philosophy.
Right.
It's not that our presentation is fanatic, or we create so many cultural barriers, or we're not conscious about what their needs are. So he makes the point that when it's for distributing prasadam, we're willing to change everything because we make money from prasadam, right? But when we do other forms of preaching, no, you can't change anything. So I liked Harinam Ruci because they're quite direct. They wear the kind of what we call ISKCON uniform. But their Harinam is seen as cool. It's culturally acceptable because they do it in an interactive way. They do it in a busking format, so you're facing the audience. For instance, if you go on Harinam and everyone is walking and doing that circle dance where we're all facing each other, then the public don't know, like, are we allowed to watch and stand, or like, how does it work?
Yeah, like what's going on, yeah.
But if you have a culturally accepted, presentation, that it's a big group of people, but they're standing in a line and they're facing a crowd, then the crowd will gather. And then you have certain people who are friendly, they engage the crowd in dancing.
Yeah.
And then you also sing 2 words at a time, so people can repeat the mantra. Because hearing, they make some benefit, but if it's Agyata Sukriti, they're making less. But when you make them chant, they know this is religious, Hare Krishna is to God. Everybody knows Hare Krishna. So they make much more advancement when you make them chant. They're chanting Nama Bas.
So Hridayananda Maharaj's point was that you have to be more direct?
His point was that we bank too much that, we don't need to preach and like make devotees. We just need to keep distributing prasad, keep chanting, even though people may not be interested in the style of chanting.
I see what
and
you're
it's
saying.
like automatically. He calls it, what's it called with Karma Kanda, where you say things come automatically? What's that word? It's one of the philosophies where basically, like, if you just do the right karma, you'll go to heaven. There's no God involved. What's that philosophy called? I forget the name.
Did Krishna was saying that to
the Leela
Govardhan
of Indra?
Leela. Yeah, the Indra.
What's the word?
Oh, yeah. Mimamsa.
Yeah.
Mimamsa.
So he calls it Bhakti Mimamsa.
Bhakti Mimamsa.
That people don't need to accept us. They don't need to actively do any service. We just keep giving them Agyata Sukriti, and then one day it's going to explode. But that's because we're not doing the preaching properly. But if we adjust and try to see what works, like Prabhupada always adjusted, right? But we're like, no, you have to stick with the form, the template that Prabhupada gave in the 70s. But the thing is, you don't see what Prabhupada did, you see why he did it. So one reason he did it, because it worked. So why change it? The second reason is, the context of his preaching was to hippies. Where are the hippies now? So we have to adjust, because certain things work for hippies, but they don't work for middle class, people earning 6 figures in New York, Western people. So like the Bhakti Center, they adjusted, that's why they attract a lot of people. So Harinam Ruci is still pretty direct and traditional, but they make the Harinam very palatable for the public.
Yeah, I've seen the video.
And they make them join in.
Fun, yeah.
Just like we did a Harinam with Harinam Ruci style, I had 200 people jumping, coming down on the floor, clapping, chanting Gauranga Hare Krishna, there's a video of it, because I did that style. So it was socially acceptable and people felt like they're willing to join in.
Yeah, I see wherever they go, whether it's a beach or a city or something, they're always involving people and making it, like you said, making it fun and things, as opposed to, I saw this one video of one Mataji, she was leading a Harinam and she was like clapping at people on their face. Yeah. And I was like feeling really uncomfortable just by watching it. What to speak of, I mean, all glories to this Mataji and her service, but like you said, there's probably a better way to relate with the public instead of like clapping in someone's face. They don't know what you're doing. Like they have no idea. Sometimes I wish we interviewed people on the street saying like, okay, you're looking at this for the first time. What do you think this is? What do you think this is? Like,
what do you think this is? Yeah,
what is this all about? What is this all about?
Which is usually people's question when they come.
Yes.
What are you guys doing here? What is this? Yeah.
I think someone did that. This YouTube channel, I Love Mayapur. They have like many subscribers.
They're really nice.
So I think they were in Germany, and there was a Harinam, and they were going around to people just looking on the periphery, like watching, and they saying, "What do you think they're doing?" And most of the people, I remember, they said, "This is something religious, but I can't exactly make out what's going on." That was so eye-opening to me.
Yeah.
And I think all devotees who do go on Harinam should care about such things.
Know. Yeah, that's why I think.
Yeah, what's the perception exactly?
That's why I think this point about Agyata Sukriti is so important, that we shouldn't overemphasize, and that shouldn't be our primary preaching strategy. Prabhupada used to say that, for instance, if they touch a book, they get benefit. But why is he saying that? Because someone can't distribute books, they're not confident yet, they're still new. So to encourage them. Because the whole point of Shastra is that we have to inspire people, right? So if someone can't do much, you just inspire, don't worry, just your smile is service, because people see Hare Krishna as are happy.
Yeah.
But that shouldn't be our primary preaching strategy.
Yes.
It's just a way to inspire people that even something small is nice. But it doesn't mean we should do something small. So I like that in Harinam Ruci. And I think it's a very important point, that sensitivity. And it's actually part of the principles of the mode of goodness, the ability to have sensitivity and to empathize, to know how someone else is feeling and to adjust accordingly. So, but a lot of the time devotees don't do that because we're too much in a box, which is one of the reasons preaching doesn't always work properly, because we're not really feeling what the people think and feel, and we're not even asking them. Sometimes you can literally just ask, how did you like it? What did you think? What are some things that you would like more? So Harinam Ruci is a very good program for doing Harinam. It's the only Harinam group that I thought, if my school friends see me, I won't be embarrassed.
Wow, that's huge.
That's an
Because
interesting way of
most
looking at
youth, most youth in the movement, they don't, if they grow up, they don't want to say too much they're Hare Krishnas because they feel a little bit embarrassed, right?
Yeah.
Either because we wear like the Indian dress, or maybe they like, we did books in a heavy way in the past, so that like people get a negative impression. So I was like, it's important that people think it's cool. It was explained that Lord Chaitanya took sannyas because that was what was respected by the common people, that sannyasis are authorities. And then some of our ISKCON academics, they say that the Danda in Kali Yuga is a PhD, which was true. But now in the postmodern world, the youth are not that, because postmodern is leaning a little bit more towards spirituality, but more in a new age way. So like the emphasis on academics, on science, like if you tell someone, yeah, you should listen to this guy, he's a PhD. Then young people, they're not that fast. Like, okay, he's a PhD. Yeah. If you like, he has 1 million followers on Instagram, they'll look at his Instagram immediately and watch his videos.
Yeah, it's a different currency. Different.
So in modern, postmodern culture, is if you have a social, if you're powerful in the social scale, whether it's music, public speaking, life coaching, all of these things. So we have to be very sensitive to where people's minds are focusing and enter from there.
Yeah. And I just love that you're emphasizing, this point that ultimately the goal is that really we want people to engage.
Yeah.
Not only that, that the devotees blow by them like this, like whirlwind, like what just happened, like really that, people can engage and find the meaning in what's going on.
And that sensitivity point, interesting, because sometimes we think we just follow what the acharyas did. What did Srila Prabhupada do? Preached the rascals, rascal scientists, hogs, dogs, camels, and asses, and, give it straight. But I think that when you are a bit more sensitive in this day and age, of course, not being balanced is really also important. Like you're saying, you were attracted by doing things traditionally, but at the same time being sensitive. So that's a real interesting balance, because tradition, but also innovation. Could you speak a little bit about how did you make that balance between tradition and innovation? Because you can do the Hridayananda Maharaj way, Krishna West, and kind of be away with the external things, but also you can be completely on the other side and say, we don't care. We just want to give the tradition straight.
We have to follow the form that Prabhupada did in the 1960s.
Yeah.
Even though sometimes they follow the form, but they don't have the mood.
Right.
Because the mood was whatever it takes to make them devotees. Prabhupada never, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's mission, I'm listening to the Bhaktisiddhanta Vaibhav now, he had no interest in preaching to hippies or low-class people. Prabhupada's Gopal even criticized him for it. The original plan of Gaudiya Math was to preach to like the very high-class people in the UK, Germany.
Uptown New York,
like
Bon Maharaj went there, right?
Yeah.
So Prabhupada originally, that was his idea.
Yeah.
But he kept adjusting until something worked.
Yes.
So that was Prabhupada's mood. So his model is to follow the mood, the compassionate mood of whatever works to make them bring them to this higher knowledge of Krishna consciousness, and not just I need to follow the cultural, ethnic, and managerial, and the time frame, the sleeping patterns of a certain era. Because you also have to see which ashram. 90% of ISKCON is in Grihastha ashram. So there's so many things. So it comes with having a cool head and also having a sincere desire to preach. Because I see a lot of the time people, they want to preach, but they want to preach because They want to be seen like, I'm a big preacher. But then they give a class and they're not really trying hard to impress the audience and convince them. They're just trying to like show off so then I can post a video on YouTube or Facebook that I'm preaching to this big crowd. And I collected this much, I did these many books. But the way they're speaking didn't really inspire the audience, and they're not trying hard to speak in a way that will capture them. So
what is that? What is that way of speaking that you can do that? What are the attributes of a, like, you could say like a talk like that? Like the way Tribhuvanath Prabhu spoke, Ayendra Prabhu spoke, or these Prabhupada, you know, like there's that spiritual backing to it, but there's something a little bit in also the way you say things also, right? What is that, you would say?
So that's a very good question. So it's explained in the Vedas, actually, in Rig Veda, there is 4 types of speech. So the gross speech is called Vaikari Vak. But if you're a pure devotee, your speech is actually full 4 levels. So you have the external speech, then you have on the mental platform, which is called Madhyama Vak, and then you have on the intellectual platform, which is called Pashyanti Vak. Like your imagination, you're seeing with the imagination, right? And then the Madhyama Vak is like the speech, like when you're thinking, you're speaking, right? But you're not verbally, physically speaking. And then the last one, that's called Paravak. So Paravak is the most powerful. So a lot of these gurus who are pure devotees, they speak from that platform of Paravak. So even if they're very strong, that Paravak is so powerful, it literally like shakes their soul and wakes them up, like Jeev Jago.
Yeah.
But obviously, not all of us are on that level, but by repeating and strictly following, we can get empowered to some extent of that Paravak. But we cannot always imitate at the same time the Paravak of the pure devotees. Like Ayendra Prabhu was very, very strict and very strong when he spoke. But if we do it, people will be uncomfortable. They'll be like, you're not on his platform, you know?
Yeah.
It doesn't have a pleasing effect always if it's not coming from that same platform.
So there is some balance of also preaching according to realization as well. But at the same time, in my personal subjective viewpoint, because it's a big topic, what inspires me when doing this is you keep the mood very sweet. So a little bit of comedy, a little bit of getting to know people, but also presenting it as a very rational, a logical spiritual science, but also combining it with some stories at the same time. So I have only limited experience. So I mainly teach university clubs or yoga groups. Those are the main 2. So university students, you can go a little bit more academic. Like Hirananda Maharaj is very good at that. He can present, he will go into like, I don't know, ontology, like how do we know what we know, epistemology, what are the foundational aspects of reality, then he'll link it with the Vedas. Yeah. And he'll mix it with a little bit of Greek said this, Christian scholars say this, and you'll link it with some world history to make it interesting, some stories, but very, very direct philosophy, but in a logical, systematic way.
Yeah.
So in my humble opinion, I'm not realized on this topic, but what works for me by personal experience and seeing results, and also observing, studying other people who have results, such as Devamrita Maharaj, Tirunnath Prabhu. They're very good at youth programs. Bhuta Bhavana Prabhu in England, Swayam Bhagavan Keshav Maharaj. They present Krishna consciousness as a very intelligent, well-educated, present ourselves, the people, by hearing the external speech, they're learning that these people are very intelligent. But also by the in-between the lines, like the Madhyama Vak, they're seeing that they're speaking from a very ancient authority, and it's something which is very systematic, and something which is very intellectually like honorable, respectable. So presenting Krishna consciousness like that, very logical, very systematic, but also direct at the same time.
Yeah.
Sometimes people think Krishna West is bridge preaching, but it's actually not. It's a technical topic, not for today. But actually the way Hirananda Maharaj speaks, he's very direct about God, about Krishna, about not being the body, but he presents it in a very academically palatable way.
Right.
There are many examples. He's one like Advaita Prabhu, Garuda Prabhu, there's so many, Radhika Raman Prabhu.
Yeah.
So there's nothing wrong with being direct. If you actually have strong understanding and faith, then like for instance, when I did book distribution on Harinam Ruci for 6-7 years, we were traveling doing Harinam, so we also do books. So you get to a point where you become so philosophically strong that you're happy when people come and debate you, and then you can very confidently and calmly address each point systematically one by one and convince people. That's also practice over the years. But when you get to that point in your sharing of Krishna consciousness, teaching of philosophy, that whatever, I'm happy to be direct, because any challenge people give, I can give a very philosophically, logically sound and academically balanced answer to them. So sometimes we're into breach preaching because we're too scared, we don't understand the philosophy properly. But when you do, it's like, why will any rational person understand this? And if they're not rational, then why do I need to speak anyway? Let them just do some other service, like take prasad, do a kirtan. But if you're only going to speak something to inspire people rationally, right? That's the point of speak, to convince them you're not the body, there are three modes of material nature, etc.
What's your, like, you meet someone right now who doesn't know anything, literally nothing. What is your 1 minute elevator speech?
So
what are the points that you can do, like a mock one, but also explain, like, for me, what I would lead with is like, you're not the body, right?
That's always a good place to start. Yeah. So I always try to really see many things, because I have, when you look at astrology, everyone has different psychology based on what signs are, what planets, etc. But I have a very sensitive kind of mind to pick up on people. So I literally look at the face and try and figure out what ethnicity they are. And by the accent, what language they're speaking. And then what age group. So many things. I try to quickly pick up some basic ideas of who they are. And then I generally try to present each time is completely different to each person.
So you're considering all of these factors.
Yeah, because when you do book distribution, you're trained like that. For instance, if I see a Latino, I'll speak to them in Spanish because they'll be more interested. How is an Indian guy speaking to me in Spanish? And I will use the word God a lot more because generally they're Catholic, right? So you make some assumptions to make it more favorable. Or for instance, if they're from Islamic background, I'm not going to mention too much form of God. I'm going to mention points which they understand. That God is very supreme. He's completely transcendent to this world. There's nothing material about God. We are all fallen souls in this world. I'm not going. But if it's a Hindu, then I'll say Krishna is very sweet. There are so many forms, of Vishnu, but Krishna is the sweetest. But I'm not going to say that to a Muslim, for example. So, but if it's just a generic one, it's a little bit like that. So I like to first give them more context. So I like to link also how Sanskrit is the oldest, language on the planet, proven by oldest living language that we know on the planet.
Yeah,
it's the Indo-European language, and Vedic culture is very ancient. So give them some faith in what I'm about to give them.
So you start with that.
It depends, but I like to give some points which give them some basic understanding of the culture.
Okay.
And then I'll be like, this is Bhagavad Gita, so it's the oldest, most widely read systematic philosophy in the world, and it's teaching. I like to mention about happiness and peace a lot.
Yeah.
Like I was in Romania just recently doing books, so it's an Orthodox country. So if you mention like Hare Krishna or Krishna, they may get switched off because they're Orthodox. So I'm just saying this is teaching you how to get peace by controlling the mind, meditation, controlling the senses, that we're not the body. Another thing I like to say is we're giving out this knowledge to help people understand that we're all equal, equality. Because it's a big theme in the Gita, and people are very emotionally, they have a very big emotional attachment to the principle of equality in society. So it doesn't matter whether you're male, female, white, black, gay, straight, even if you're trans. All of us, we're all brothers and sisters. And this is directly explained philosophically in the Gita. That why? Because we're not our body or our mind. Because if you're gay, there is some biological level, but it's mainly your mind, right? So even your mind,
not even your mind, right?
So even if you're feeling depressed, don't worry. This knowledge will help you how to transcend your mind.
Right.
By meditation, with mantras, things like that. So a little bit of not the body, a little bit of peace and happiness like that. If it's on the street. But it depends. I try to be very tailor-made to each person.
Yeah, so you're not going straight Krishna and the same thing for everyone.
Yeah. With Indians, yes. Hindus. Because you can generally tell, like, if they're from Hindu background, then I go much more direct. Otherwise, a little bit lighter.
Indian people like that, I think. Yeah.
I was just wondering, with this Harinam Ruci experience that you've had, you've been practicing Krishna consciousness apart from temples in many ways.
Right.
So I was just wondering what it's been like for you to kind of have the bulk of your Krishna conscious practice and engagement be out in the world, out in the community, and how does that feel for you, and any reflections you've had about that?
That's a very nice topic as well.
We have time. Yeah.
So there are some very important things that I realized from traveling. One is that we all know this pastime, right, of Gajendra, right? So there Prabhupada explains that you have to practice Krishna consciousness from a point of strength. So although ideally bhakti means that full surrender, because bhakti is different from karma yoga in one sense, because we don't give too much precedence to our guna and karma, to our psychophysical nature, but we're willing to do any service. We're completely surrendered, whatever Krishna wants.
That Gajendra purport, he wrote it when some sannyasis were falling down at that time.
Oh yeah.
He wrote that purport, the Gajendra purport, that what you just said, that you do Krishna consciousness from a point of strength, no matter if it's a grihastha or a sannyasi.
He was encouraging.
Because he was encouraging devotees, because at the time in ISKCON, that stuff was happening.
It was difficult.
Isn't that so interesting?
Wow.
Anyway, sorry, continue.
That's crazy. So for me, traveling was much... I tried living in the ashram for some time, but for me, it's very difficult to just like be stuck in one place, same thing every day. I was getting a little bit bored. Like it was a bit monotonous for me because I don't know why I seem to have in my, karma travel. Anyone that's read it, they're like, you have so much travel in your chart.
Wow.
So the ashram is not my stationary ashram is not really my psychophysical nature.
Yeah.
So I could do it for a short time, but after some time I started getting itchy feet. Like I need to do something else. So sometimes people are like, but you feel like unstable or what's the word? Unsettled by traveling because you're never in one place. But for me, I feel settled because I'm traveling. Because it's settled means you're doing something in harmony with your psychophysical nature.
Yeah.
That way your service is not going quick, but it's going far for a long time. So you can do something very intense like, I'm going to do 12 hours of books a day, but then after 5 months, burnout, right? So we have to find the balance between pushing ourselves, but pushing ourselves in a way that we have a long-term advancement vision plan. So that is a big lesson I learned by traveling, that everyone should be very conscious and very self-analytical to see what's in their nature and where do they find that balance between pushing myself to excel, but also not so hard that it gets tiring. Another big lesson, which I find helped to my... I'm still not very mature, but it helped me to mature from wherever I was before, to understand the Krishna conscious movement, not only from a religious or from a philosophical or ritual perspective, but also historically and sociologically. And to look for patterns in sociology, look for patterns in age groups, look for patterns between young people who are born or not born in Krishna consciousness. Certain criticisms people get, but seeing it in a balanced way because you've seen the same thing in many places. So you learn patterns, right? The whole Gita, 20-something% of the Gita is on the 3 modes. So the 3 modes is basically teaching lifestyle, right? And it's teaching patterns according to what mode you're in. So by traveling, I could get a very more peaceful and relaxed understanding, even though there may be controversies in our movement, but you can study the whole thing as a whole because you have an aerial view.
Right. You're getting a wider perspective, wider view.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Please.
So I've been to ISKCON in maybe almost 100 countries. So I try to go somewhere and study the people, study the mindset, the language, for instance, Latin America, Africa, India, Thailand, so many, Vietnam, so many places, see their mentality and then see the patterns. That some things that devotees do, don't blame it on them. That's the cultural pattern they're brought up in.
What place were you impressed by, like unexpectedly, that you went? 100 places you went?
Almost, yeah. So
100 countries? Wow.
Incredible.
That's a lot of places.
The Harinam Ruci team is very ambitious. So.
It's beautiful. Really.
They have a schedule like that's set?
Yeah, now we have a few different groups, like at different times.
Oh, really? It's not just one?
So now it's like the main one, and then there's a boy called Harinam Ananda, very nice brahmachari. Yes. He often does certain other places, like different route.
And he has his own group of people that go with
a few people, and sometimes we join together or not. So like now I'm going to Africa. We have something in Africa soon. So like
with Harinam Ruci?
Yeah. Some of them, not the whole team, just 2 people.
Okay.
So what was the question you asked?
What place were you unexpectedly impressed by?
Do you mean in terms of ISKCON development or people's favorability or just general culture?
I would say ISKCON. Like you went there and you were like, oh, I didn't even realize like this was not on my radar that this place existed, and there's all these cool devotees and everyone's sincere and
There are many. I'll give you a couple just very briefly. So one is last year with one member from Harinam Ruci, we did a tour of the Caribbean. So he's called Vicharu Prabhu, this devotee.
Yes.
So he was Tamal Krishna Maharaj's servant. So he's very ambitious. So he gave me a list of 12 countries in the Caribbean, and he says, I want to cover all of these places with you.
He came to New Jersey right before he did that, actually. I remember he was here, and I was like, where are you going? He's, I'm going to Caribbean, and Sandipani's going to be there, and
So we did about 9 countries in 6 weeks. This was about a year ago, last March or something. And we went to all these small islands because generally nobody goes to these islands. There's not many devotees.
Yeah.
But there are actually devotees in almost all of them. That was a big surprise for me.
Wow.
So that's one of the big surprises. And we went to one random island called St. Lucia, which has a couple 100,000 population. Maybe, I can't remember clearly, maybe even less. And they had a big temple. And it's just, there was one lady who grew up in Guyana. She's called Mandakini Mataji. And she was a Kshatriya because she grew up in a difficult situation. So she even had to fight someone with a gun in self-defense. She was that very intense, strong lady. She personally collected money and she built a huge temple. Like it's pretty much the size of the temple of New York Temple.
A Brooklyn, New York, Brooklyn temple?
Pretty much
That's
the size.
huge.
Not the height, but the size.
Yeah.
She, with her own money, it's a small island with hardly anyone there. And her business was she would sell soya chunks to supermarkets in St. Lucia at a good profit.
Wow.
And she also, you know, got some other ways to collect for the temple. So that was a big surprise that somebody so, you know, meek and simple, just from like a small country called Guyana, very low population, from an Indian indentured labor, British brought them background. And she opened a temple on this random island. And actually on that island, I met the leader of the Rastafarian community and became good friends with him.
Wow.
And he took a whole set of books.
Wow.
Because the way I was distributing books there was how Bhakti Tirtha Maharaj was doing in the 80s, around the New Vrindavan time, where they were linking it with Christianity and African culture. So I was using a lot of that knowledge, like Haile Selassie, Afro-Asiatic connection, that 1 million years ago there was continental drift, India, Africa, Australia were one continent, all of these kind of ideas, and I was linking it with the book distribution. So I was saying this is the oldest Afro-Asiatic culture known to man. Because sometimes you can play on people's patriotism. So this is also African culture. Right. And then I was mentioning how in East Africa, many tribes believe God is blue and he's a cowherder. So then the people are like, whoa, we're from African background and this is the roots. So then they become very impressed. So that was one place. The second one is Lithuania.
Oh. Complete other direction.
Yeah.
Complete other direction, complete other temperature, and complete other color. They're like the most pale people. It's like very north in the world.
Yeah.
Just by Russia, you know. Very cold country. They have the highest percentage of devotees if you divide devotee population by country population in the world.
Wow.
The percentage of devotees is the most.
In the country.
So they have around, I believe, 1 or 2 million people. And I think not 1%, half of a percent is ISKCON devotees of the country.
Wow.
Or Gaudiya Vaishnavas.
Sure, because there's other
There's
groups
different
there.
lines also there.
Yeah.
Different Radhakund line, Srila Narayan Maharaj, different lines.
line, yeah.
So, but Hare Krishna community is very big. So that was very impressive. And one of the reasons I saw was because if you're trying to convince someone of Krishna consciousness, you have to convince them how it relates to their personal life at the moment. So Lithuanians are very interested. One reason is because Sanskrit and Lithuanian are very close. And according to their own university, who are not devotees, just University of Vilnius, they say our language is the closest Indo-European language, European language to Sanskrit. So people are like, oh, I'm Lithuanian and this is the oldest book linked to my heritage. Let me give it a read, Bhagavad Gita. So they're open-minded because it's linked, it's in their blood.
Yeah.
And that's proven by their own secular academics. And they're confused. They're like, so we're actually linked to India because our language is similar to your language. So they're like, well, you're not a foreign thing. You're linked to us, our ancestors.
I like how you tried to really think about how you can relate with someone based on something, and you turn it into that, you might be interested in this because it's related to you somehow. Like you saying about the Lithuanian connection with Sanskrit or the Afro, you know, Asiatic culture. Like that takes some skill for sure.
And I think I don't know for sure, but for me personally, it has a big effect in what I do.
What do you mean?
Like linking it culturally to people.
Yeah.
So, because you have to bridge a gap, right? So there's a cultural gap,
Bridging the
potentially is a religious gap or a philosophical gap. So the more you can link it to make it familiar with them, the easier it is to ease into something.
Yeah.
Yeah. It probably makes it more exciting for them, just like from their standpoint. Okay, this is relevant to me. There's a place for me in this philosophy.
For sure.
So I think it's important because it's down to that point again of sensitivity, that instead of you having to come up to a very big, you know, entry fee, big entry fee of like sacrificing so many things, understanding, just make it more relevant to you. So you can, then the bridge is easier to cross.
Yeah. Well, Sandy, it was really nice talking with you and learning more about you. And I feel very inspired by your example and the way you live your life in sharing Krishna consciousness and being a serious devotee. And I think it's very rare, and I think it's very inspiring, because I think you can inspire a lot of people who might be on the fence about Krishna consciousness, who might have grown up in it, but who are thinking, well, I'm not sure about it, but you know, he did it, and he's you seem very happy, and you seem very content with your life. That's good preaching.
Yeah, that is good preaching. Just by example.
Exactly.
The word that kept coming to mind for me was resolute. You're just very resolute. Like, it's not a complicated thing. That, you know, you've thought very deeply about Krishna consciousness, and you're where you want to be. You're serving in the way that you want to serve.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Well, thank you again.
A good thing to end on is based on this. Prabhupada, Raghunath Prabhu was there when Prabhupada said it. It's a very famous quote where Prabhupada says, the point of Krishna consciousness is so simple that you can very easily miss it.
That's true.
And it's linked to this point about sadhu sangha. Everything came from that.
Yes.
For all of us.
For all of us, yeah.
So, and when the more sadhu sangha you get, then the more you feel inspired to connect others.
Sure.
So it's a nice point to end on.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. Thanks, Dina.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. The Namras Podcast. Please like, subscribe, comment. If you really like this podcast, please consider donating. You'll see it link in the description. If you want to contact Sandipani Muni Prabhu, I'll also put his contact details in the description also, so you can get in touch with him. And also Harinam Ruci, big shout out to them for doing what they do. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Hare Krishna. Have a good night.
Bye. That's nice. Nice discussion.
Yeah, it was great. It was so nice.